Welcome everybody, we're here at the Amsterdam Museum to have a talk, a new narratives talk about the current temporary exhibition, Refresh Amsterdam, A Sense of Place. I'm here with my colleague curator Imara Limon, who has curated this exhibition, and one of the artists who is featured in this exhibition, Antonis Pitas. Welcome. We are very sad to say that we are missing another guest that we would have loved to be talking to this morning as well, and that is Suat Ogut. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it today, and so we will feature some of his work, and Imara can tell us a little bit about what his work is about. So we will try to have him here in spirit as well, and we wish him well. Imara, can I start with asking you a little bit about the choice for the theme, Sense of Place?
Yes, definitely. Sense of Place is the theme for this year's project, Refresh Amsterdam. It's an exhibition here at the Amsterdam Museum, as well as a program in the city, because we organized Refresh Amsterdam with seven partner institutions in the city who also have different programming at their locations. But at the Amsterdam Museum we have an exhibition which featured 25 artists, and at the beginning of 2020 we organized an open call where everyone could hand in a work, a proposal for a work, usually new work, and Sense of Place was a theme that we thought of because we wanted to respond to the concept of Amsterdam and to reimagine it in a way. And Amsterdam, a sense of place, sense is something that refers to a perception, something that's personal, that starts from how do people feel in Amsterdam? Do they feel at home? Is there a sense of belonging? It's all subjective and personal. That's what Sense of Place came from, because we think it's important to not only talk about the city as it is built or all the facts about the city, but how do people perceive it who live here? Can they see this as a home, for example?
Thank you. Okay, so it's really focusing on the lived city. And so, yeah, that very much connects to the work that you made for this exhibition. Antonis, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, about how you came to live in Amsterdam, and what the theme of the exhibition, Sense of Place, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, it's always very interesting when someone deals with such a questions, you know, the sense of belonging, and especially me as a foreigner moving in Amsterdam and coming from a different background. My background is I'm from Greece, I'm from Athens. And it's quite interesting living many decades away from home, figuring out, and especially when you're getting a little bit older, it's also quite interesting too, that you start to find your way to connect with the city, connect with the citizens, connect with the atmosphere, connect with even with the nature. That's very different than the nature that are coming from. So I always found that interesting when I'm walking into the city. It's something that I'm really doing very often. I discover cities, and also when I visit cities, I'm doing that. It's the sense that you're going to figure out the small details of the city. And always, because I'm quite fascinated with architecture, I was always would have looked at details of architecture of specific buildings. So in a way, it makes it interesting link to the decision of mine to apply to this open call that was made by the Gemeente Amsterdam, and has to do with fragments, lost and unknown fragments from architectural buildings. So architectural fragments, let's say. So then I apply, so then I thought is the best way to look and relate myself within the city, it was to look back into the past and figure out within the past how I can relate with it within the present. So that was, let's say, the basic idea of this contribution of mine into the exhibition.
So were you already working on this kind of line of thought?
Yeah, I have to say that it's more than the last 10 years that I'm working a lot with an idea of how you're capturing public memory on the making. So the idea of how let's say, you relate with something that is happening and how you reflect immediately without waiting these historical circles and time to allow yourself to position yourself, let's say, within the risk, of course, sometimes, because we know very well that in life and in our times, moments changing dramatically and changing in one day. So it's quite interesting that, without kind of distressing yourself from that fact and just figuring out how you can touch things that you found interesting and important for you. So in that case, something that I'm really working the last 10 years, and also I'm looking and investigating and researching around the idea of how you're capturing the public memory and how this have been happened in the history of architecture and socially speaking, with an idea, of course, how much most of the times what's happening is that on the public space we deal with public art and then relate it always with memorial. The idea that the sense of collective memory. And it is something that already kind of fascinates me. What is the ingredient, how you do, and how you're dealing with a sense of representation. Something also that's very interesting, especially on the narrative of Amsterdam, with all this cosmopolitan.
That's also exactly where this whole Refresh project comes from this beginning of thinking about what is the city until now, how is it presented by us as an Amsterdam museum, as an institution that holds the collections of the city. And Refresh Amsterdam, that's why we didn't make it a one-time project. It's something that expands over the years with an online platform where we deepen our thoughts on what is the city and for whom is the city. And I think just it also taps into this moment where you see much more activism from grassroots movements for representation, for redefining, and for becoming also a part of the dominant narrative of how we see the city and who is welcome here. And now I'm going to ask a question, don't know if that's allowed, but I keep thinking about it. Because this morning I was also thinking about how all these things are aligning at this moment, all the different movements coming more and more together, overlapping, more explicitly being intersectional, if you can say so. And I felt that your work was also very much influenced by this time of 2020. When we started this open call, it was the beginning of the year where the whole COVID-19 was not in the Netherlands yet, or not so much in the news. And then exactly after our selection of all the proposals, this happened. We had digital conversations with everyone, and your work also developed throughout that time. So maybe you can tell us something about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it did also, especially, I could say, one specific work from the installation, from the sculpture installation, also deals a lot with these two. It is true that, again, going back to this idea of the news, how, let's say, how fast things changing, and especially with the pandemic, we go to a kind of, we're forced to be in a kind of new model of communication. And also, if you can say again, what really the pandemic brought up is the sense of collective, sense of society, citizen, and the relation with each other. So that's something that's also quite interesting, how much influence, in the end, our behavior also into the public space. That was very interesting too, and also our behavior as a social creatures. In relation of going back to something that doesn't seem that they're similar, but going back to the movements, as you say, in the beginning of the year, it was also not in the beginning, it was in the springtime. It was the Black Lives Matters movement.
1st of June.
Exactly. So, and then I found it really. I was also busy with the proposal, and I was already busy. I already had the fragments with me, and I was doing a research around history in Amsterdam of demonstrations. It was really interesting to dive on the past and see the movements that have been very important, especially after '68. We know very well, I mean, it's a well-known history in Amsterdam, as also Amsterdam representing, I don't like so much the word tolerance, but it represents, let's say, a city of trying to deal with an idea of a free will. because I wouldn't say that got it, but
But
because
freedom is a very important concept
exactly.
for Amsterdam in its
Exactly.
self-image.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So the image, unfortunately, later on became a consuming image, but doesn't matter. It's another criticism here. So in a way, looking on the Black Lives Matter movement, and what really happened a lot is, of course, you have all the signs, the placards and signs that people write things. And one of the words that was really there non-stop, it was the word enough. And kind of really hit me. It's this kind of the moment that you kind of looking through images, walking on the street, be part of this demonstration, and looking, and suddenly you're realizing that it's one word that represents the moment. And that was the moment of enough. The feeling, not only for the Black Lives Matter, but in general, we are in a time of enough. It's just enough. Enough in relation with the, also we could look also on the American politics. It was the period, of course, of Trump, and also looking on what happened in the US and the whole domino that had been created with Black Lives Matter movement. And it's a feeling that the society turns or wants to turn the page, kind of really revisit all this notion of ethics, of the things that we are really stand up as humans. And so in a way, this word kind of stuck. I couldn't really sleep in the night. It was very funny, how very interesting. I don't know if it's funny necessarily, how interesting kind of became maniac with an idea of the enough. And I think also with the COVID, this moment that we are like, compresses so much this kind of isolation, the control movement. Also, on the same time, the thinking in relation with ecology, the fear that we have. So all those kind of things kind of find his way with this, I wouldn't say slogan word, but kind of a monumental word. Mm-hmm. So that's exactly what I did. I used this word for one of the stones. I can go to details.
It ended up as the title of your work, right?
And actually became the title of the exhibition.
Yes, and it's very visible when you walk into the space. You also see those exact letters. It's very powerful to see those exact letters that you might recognize from these public debates, from all these signs, which often they are recurring. The I Can't Breathe coming from 2014 already, and this one being, in my memory, a bit newer or a bit like more recent. And you see it in the space on your work. Yeah, it goes.
I mean, it's so interesting that suddenly everyone recognizes it, and that's very. There's something very common in my work. I'm really trying, and I'm looking a lot on. I'm doing research on every day, daily, religiously almost, on online newspapers. I'm collecting quotations. So I'm interested in this kind of slogan, kind of qualities, because it's also the one that through the consuming also brain that we have already have been trained on this. I think it's really important to come across immediately and direct with the meanings and the symbols that you would like to make people aware.
Just a small question, can you help us visualize that a bit? Can you see those letters, but they're not just text, they're made from
that's a beautiful story. I mean,
because I know, but I really want to
let's go in a similar direction, because it's a beautiful marble fragment that you got from the municipal government after an open call that you could, as in your case, an artist, collect these.
Let's go a little bit in the beginning.
It's a long story. We know where to start.
Let's go from the beginning. So what happened is that you could apply for those fragments. And then you could only have one image. You could see one image. And one image that I had that I could look through, it was a pile of stones that it was above to each other, it was like a pile. So I could only see the top of one stone, and it was writing acitier. Later on we found out that actually it's amicitier. It's this Latin word of idea of a friendship. So then I was fascinated because I really liked very much already the fragment of a word. So then I apply for this. This belonged to the category C. And actually the category C is like a fragments that they are unknown, they don't really necessarily know where they're coming from. So I received this palette in my studio, and it was giant palette. I was not aware of the size of it. and I was not very much aware of the how heavy it was. So it was almost 1,000 kilos, the whole pallet. So I was already very scared if the building would kind of handle the weight. But in any case, what happened is that one of the big stones was already broken. And then I realized that actually it's marble. The image that I had, you could only see dust, so you couldn't really understand what kind of stone is there, of course. So, and it's very interesting because if we want to get this banal almost level that I'm Greek and a marble comes, so that's, you know, it's kind of interesting anyway. And I grew up in Athens, and I grew up in the center of Athens, so I was always surrounded by those ruins, you know. So for me, it's like a very natural thing.
It spoke to you.
Yeah, immediately, you know, it's like a very natural
Made you feel more at home.
Yes, you immediately, you see, you're looking always of images that you will make you feel home, when especially you're not, when this place is not your birthplace. Yes, exactly. So anyways, this happened. And then through the research and looking, it was text, so I could read this text. And actually, the stone was almost on the floor, but I could just put my telephone under it. So I figured out that it was some text. So I kind of copied those texts and I Googled them. And then I found out actually that exists this stone in Amsterdam. And it was a stone was related to, it was dated at the end of 17th century, the 18th century, the beginning of the 18th century. And it was kind of dedicated to the mayors of that time that kind of helped Amsterdam after a big flood that happened in Amsterdam with breaking the dikes of the city, and they renovated. So they memorialized that moment, these kids of the burgemeesters, the mayors. So then I was really fascinated with an idea of how we, going back to the main theme of my work, how you memorializing, how you capturing this moment of importance.
It's crazy that all these fragments are still there, all these architectural fragments somewhere under the ground, probably in this municipal depot.
Exactly.
And we know, of course, from the Rokin metro station, where you have all these treasures that are beautiful and interesting and quite small in a display at the metro station. But what people might not know is that you also have these stone fragments, which you then repurposed.
Yeah, and actually they did renovate one of those. The kind of it's not disappeared, but the one that I have, it seems that is the original one. Of course, as we said, lovely that we will say about the marble. The idea, though, what is very important here to know is that the marble, of course, is not made for Netherlands. So the temperature differences, the weather conditions are mostly destroy the marble. And so this marble actually, it's in a very bad condition, cannot be restored. It's impossible. So saying that, the broken marble, this very big of stone, was be broken, and then other small pieces are falling apart. So then I thought, okay, coming from this notion also of recycling, and one of the main themes of my work is recycling history. And as parameters there, two parameters like recycling history, contemporizing history, historicizing the contemporary. So they're very similar and opposite meanings. So within this in mind, and automatically, I thought, let's recycle the stone. Just recycle the material. Not only recycling the history of the stone, but also the material itself. Since also I'm in the last period crisis, thinking, okay, how many more stuff we can add in this world? You know, I'm also start thinking a lot around that. So anyway, then I decide, and I also call the gemeente. I got the permission because they know also that they can't really do anything with the stones. And I have to say they do it with a lot of care. It's not that they don't care. They're really looking and tracing around it, what is the...
To conserve it.
Yeah, exactly. So then I got the permission. So then what I did, I smashed the marble stone, and then I got the dust out of it. And I cast it, and I cast the word enough.
I hadn't known this technique before, right? Is it?
It's something that you do it with cement, or you're doing it with epoxy. There are different materials that you can use. So it's quite often that this kind of you have this marble dust, and it's also an old technique, by the way.
But in your case, it was also important that it was from the stone.
Absolutely. the confusion that sometimes people can have is if these relate with this stone. No, it doesn't. It doesn't relate with the story of the flood of Amsterdam. It's interesting though.
You mean where they
exactly the original background comes from. The idea is about how what we would have contemporized now.
It's more about time.
Yes, about what would have been now in our time under this circumstance and this condition. What we would have what we would have kept in our memory. And then I thought, enough is the word to
of 2020.
Exactly.
Yes.
And exactly for the representation, also for the movement, basically.
And what makes it different in that? Because the slogans, the protest demonstrations, the whole Black Lives Matter, it's all recurring throughout history. And what do you see? What is different in 2020 for you? Because you said that enough means.
You know. Yeah, it's obviously, I think it's quite large. Many things to say on this, but what I want to say is that probably is the first time that we are a bit more honest, or we're looking in our history a little bit more directly.
Something has shifted. It's difficult
it did,
to pinpoint
indeed.
What and
I mean,
how.
it's a global thing again. It's not only in the Netherlands, but it's like the idea of. I was talking before about the ethics, the new. How we deal with patriarchy, how we're dealing with rights, with minorities, things that we mainly for hundreds of years, I could say, we kind of avoid. And we think about in the 70s, 60s movements like feminism movements, all those things that they happened already, they prepare in a way, but in a certain level we lost it. We kind of compromised. We kind of passively accept it. And I think that's exactly what doesn't happen anymore. And that's really what I'm really referring back in this idea of enough. The sense of equality is not theory anymore. It cannot be theory.
No. And
it's a daily praxis. It's daily act. And I think that's something that's really changing. And I don't know, I mean, I'm also optimistic in terms that also to go against of this political pessimism and looking back in the past as the best period of our life. For God's sake, it was never good. The past was never good. It was only for a few people and only for a very specific elite. So the things to come, it's only based on the future. That's my optimistic, not only optimistic, but deeply believe on it. Because, so then, if we put on this context, we are in movement in time that we're going to revisit those notions, we're going to restage our daily life of interaction, the sense of respect, understanding, acceptance, and not words like tolerance, like this kind of over-symbolizing thing of superior idea of the wide perspective. No, for God's sake, no. Enough.
And not only in its concepts, of course, also in its power shifts in institutions and the way they are managed and the things that you often were counterculture and changing these narratives, which would happen in the margins, often fighting for a more central place in society. And I think it's becoming more and more central,
exactly.
And even these new initiatives to...
Absolutely. And I think this is also there's something that we really see and more that of course things are changing in terms of how the younger generation interact now. It's different than my generation or the older generation. That's also part of our narrative. This happened always.
And it's so much also about visibility of the fact that there are in the museum like 25 different projects shedding their light on what is Amsterdam and what is Amsterdam to them through their eyes, like a range of artists from all kinds of backgrounds, disciplines, as well as in Suat's work you see so much this visibility or invisibility, who is seen in the city, who is not seen, departing from architectural settings to also this, he invites people to have a dialogue about all the concepts from gentrification to migration and combining them together. And I thought that's also really beautiful to connect this back to this 2020 time where these worlds collide of the corona crisis and also all the demonstrations that took place, which are not completely separated. And that's what I see so much in all the works. Not only the concepts overlap, but also the different that we're seen maybe as different realities, health crisis, equality for different people, and the narratives that institutions tell, but also then the structures behind the scenes. So it all comes together in a way.
Yeah, I think both Suat's work and your work, Anton, is very much about connections and about connecting the past and the present. Yeah. But Suat's work is also very much about connecting people through food. I think one of the very nice things about his work at the exhibition is the fact that usually in a museum you are supposed to keep your distance, but his work, which is a carpet with a little wooden building and which is made into a table, and the idea is to invite visitors to sit at that carpet 1.5 meters apart. Of course, it's still Corona time, but it is a way of meeting each other and having an exchange. And perhaps that's also where you referred to just we are in this moment in time. It's public space is also a meeting space, and I think also at the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, I think one of the things that gave people hope is that there were so many people from so many walks of life. So perhaps,
but that's similarities are there with both of our works, and I also liked very much on his work the idea of the secrets, the hidden, there's something that's like hidden. Claiming the public space is one of the big topic and the big issue. I mean, how we claim, who claims the public space, to who belongs, and again back to the idea of the representation. What is the representation in public space, and how you do that, and then of course with all these movements and also kind of the result of them many times also deals with vandalism, this idea of revisiting these monuments. And I think that's such an interesting, especially for me as an artist, looking on this idea of representation and aesthetics, even that also in the end creates an aesthetics, and open up very much the dialogue. How are we going to deal in the future? How we are going to have this polyphonic and this polyphonic approach also to the aesthetics, but also to the idea of representing stories.
And it's also this in and outside the institution, because as this whole project Refresh Amsterdam takes place in the museum as an exhibition, but explicitly also with these partner institutions in the city, where people can also organize performance or do something in public space, and work more interdisciplinary, because that's what you also see. It's not just a work in a space, but it interacts with society in a very active way. As your work, I can also imagine it in a public space, being there for everyone to see on their daily commutes and
be part of this narrative. But also we have to understand, I mean, talking about representation and continuation, time, history, the public space is there as a witnessing that, and is there of representing all these layers of time and humans that pass by, because that's what we do, we pass by. So then this idea of what is the traces and what's left behind, I think is very important and very crucial thing for the public memory and the history of the city. So also when we are too obsessed about preservation, I think it's also quite, in my opinion, it's also, and I have this theory, I mean, it's not a very smart one, but it's an observation. What we can never do in our body, because humans they wish to live as much as possible, but actually they can't, so we're going to face death. So what we do, we project all this obsession of us to remain in time to the objects. So suddenly the object has to stay there thousands of years, forever even. And that's, in my opinion, is just a delusion. It's just the idea of accepting the fact that time comes there and destroys, vanishes, takes away. It's absolutely natural. So in this case, I do believe, within this in mind, sometimes we should be less obsessive and try to...
at the core of the museum to attach to this preservation and the idea that memory is attached to anything that you can still see or touch, and your identity is so connected to the material in that sense. So that is also a difficult position for institutions who want to preserve and keep and collect more art and objects rather than...
I know.
At least there can be a transformation in the storytelling. So I think even if the objects, we try to preserve them for as long as possible.
And it's the nature of it, I understand, of course. I mean, don't misunderstand me. I'm coming across a little bit of an unorthodox and anarchistic, let's say, opinion. But yes, that's exactly what the museum does. The last period, especially, they do this kind of revisiting with a different eye and critical perspective. Because some people also misunderstanding, it's not about erasing history. I'm not in favor of erasing history. Revisiting history is something completely different.
There's a big fear around around really leaving this idea of only preserving and adding. I think because what is left from history is often these the objects that have been preserved and the people who have been able to preserve their personal objects and their art and their works, and anyone who had a more oral culture perhaps might not have this in the dominant Western institutions. And where is this whole movement ongoing of institutions wanting to include different narratives, and how do you do that if there are no objects, and the difficulty of reimagining what's heritage can be, and if it can be also something that's not physically there. There's always this tension between the value attached to what's material and less value of invisible traditions, and but it's changing now, and
I think it's a good start to realize that the old way of doing things for museums is also storytelling. It is not a neutral history. It's also storytelling from a certain perspective. Usually the perspective of the elite. So adding new perspectives is just going to enrich our appreciation and our relation with the history, with the objects, with the material and the immaterial side of who we are. And I think the fact that we all meet each other in the city nowadays, much more diverse. This has become a city of minorities. So that I think is a very interesting perspective going forward. We're going to have to round up. Are there things about the exhibition, about the theme, sense of place, about the work of you and Suat that we need to mention here? You want to add a thought?
Well, maybe also to round up, one of the things that that Refresh also tries to do is to start from a very clear perspective of adding new narratives to the idea of the concept of Amsterdam, to broaden this concept, and that just maybe like to give a few examples of how this can be done through different artworks, but also through imagining if Amsterdam is not a place where you were born and this is still part of your identity, of your memories, to try and reimagine it as part of the city. So we have the campaign image, for example, for Refresh, which is shot on Curaçao, and which immediately confuses you when you look at it, because you might not see a canal house or anything that's typically Amsterdam. And trying to change the narrative also has to do with this conditioning of what can you imagine being part of a city or the people who live here. It has to do so much with this imagination. And when we do this every 2 years with new artworks, new commissions, new topics, new themes, somehow they become part of the collection, because we also acquire several works. We write essays, we commission different authors and thinkers to become part of this conversation. And so I think it's an ongoing process of reconditioning in a way.
Well, the exhibition features 25 different artists, so you have 25 different perspectives on this current time. Antonis, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your work at the exhibition. Imara, thank you as well. Unfortunately, at the moment, the museum is still closed, but we hope to be open soon. The exhibition is still on display. And in the meantime, please visit the website, the exhibition website, refresh.amsterdam, because you can get a really nice impression of all the artists and all the works that are on display. There's also, there has been an interesting symposium about the subjects, the themes, some of the themes we also discussed today, which can be watched online. So we hope you can enjoy the exhibition online for the time being, but we hope to welcome you back in the museum real soon.